friends, it's Jacob who's back to talk a little bit prog. The year was, I guess, 1984. I was a burgeoning Yes fan. I had Fragile and Tales from Topographic Oceans in my record collection, and I needed more. I was totally hooked. My mom at the time was studying at the University of Oslo. We were living in the suburbs, and you just couldn't find stuff like that in local record stores. So I came with her to the university because I knew that they had a pretty good record store, and I was determined to find some more Yes records. So I came there, and I think they only had one, but it was from the 70s, so it seemed like it must be okay, because I knew, in the local record store in the suburb where we lived, they had, of course, 90125, which at the time I honestly didn't like that much. Now I love it, but at the time it was like, that's not Yes. Anyway, what they had at the university record store was Tormato. And I actually have this on vinyl. I've been looking all over for it. I can't find it, which really pains me. Pains me to have to hold up a mere CD. This is actually some sort of Japanese remaster that came with a box set that I got a few years ago. Never even listened to. Actually, I have listened to it now, but only because I was doing this particular show. Okay, where do we start? Tormato, 1978. A controversial album, to say the least. It came off the heels of 1977's Going for the One, which I think most Yes fans agree is a pretty brilliant album. For those who didn't particularly like the preceding two albums, which I don't know why you wouldn't, but okay, some people don't. It was sort of a return to form. But I think it was just an extension of form. It was a great album. They recorded that in Switzerland, which I think they all enjoyed. It was a pretty peaceful time of recording in a band that generally didn't get along that well, but they did, sort of. Okay, sold pretty good. Wondrous Stories was kind of a little hit. And they reconvened to record Tormato. And I guess they had various plans for where they were going to record it, but they ended up recording it in England. I think one of the plans was to go to Barbados, actually. They ended up recording it in England. The sessions weren't very happy. There was a lot of strife within the band. They started out recording with Eddie Offord, who had, recorded their previous albums. Somehow that didn't work out. I haven't been able to find information about exactly why it didn't work out. We know that Eddie had a bit of a drug problem. That could have been part of it. Anyway, halfway through the recording, they kicked Eddie out and decided to self-produce. Steve Howe has said that he thinks the album is overplayed and underproduced, and I guess he has a point there. Part of the issue that sort of mars the album is that I think Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman take up a lot of space, and their egos weren't checked by an external producer. I mean, that's what happens when you self-produce. You sort of get a little bit overindulgent. So there's a lot of playing from Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman. Pretty good playing, I have to say. People criticize, especially Rick Wakeman, for the use of the Polymoog, which has sort of a thin sound, and I agree it's not the greatest sound, but I think a lot of his playing on the album is actually very good. I think in terms of Rick's contributions, I think it's a bit of an undervalued album. So that's that. Okay, another issue that people have with the album is the sound. It's got a thin sound, I guess you could say. And apparently it was recorded, and this was probably Eddie's doing, it was recorded with Dolby. It was encoded to Dolby. But then at the end of the process, possibly because Eddie wasn't there anymore, it was forgotten that it had been encoded with Dolby, so it never got decoded with Dolby technology. And ended up sounding pretty thin and weird. So this is the same issue that Steely Dan had when they recorded Katie Lied, which the same thing happened. It got encoded but not decoded. So what happens in the old Dolby noise suppression technology is that you encode it by adding a lot of high frequency content, sort of hissy, noisy stuff, which then at the end of the process gets decoded, gets sort of removed, and with that the noise is removed. It's a clever, imperfect, but relatively good process. But if you don't decode it, you end up with a thin, sort of harsh sound. And that happened with this album. So it doesn't sound great. At some point, a remastering engineer discovered this and fixed it. So on recent remasters, you get more of the full sound. I listened to this. I suspect this has not fixed that issue because this sounds pretty thin and it's also kind of over compressed. So I didn't really like the sound of this. To me, the vinyl sounds okay. I mean, it's Going for the One isn't a great sounding album either, actually. So it's sort of just the sound of late 70s, yes, to me. I don't know. Anyway, you got the songs, and some of the songs I really like. The album opens with Future Times Rejoice, sort of a 2-for-1 deal. And we say this a lot about sort of second tier yes. It sounds kind of like Starcastle, which in my book is not a bad thing, but it's sort of like it's stereotypical yes, bordering on the parodic, but it's a catchy, uplifting tune that I think opens the album in really good fashion. It's got some great playing from Rick Wakeman. I really like it. Next comes Don't Kill the Whale, which was released as a single, and people have different opinions on this song. I hate it. Can't stand it. It's enough said. After that comes Madrigal. I don't know how you pronounce that. Which is sort of like a medieval balladesque kind of thing. A little bit, I guess, like turn of the century from the previous album, but not quite as progressive. But it's nice. It's pretty. It's atmospheric. I like it. And then side A ends with Release, which is kind of a surprising song. It has a sort of 50s rock and roll groove to it, very aggressive bass playing. I mean, Chris Squire's bass playing on that song is off the charts. It's so good, and his sound is so good. Steve Howe goes wild with, his Les Paul isms. And I've never really understood the lyrics. Is it about releasing people from prison? I don't know. It's kind of a fun, sort of uncharacteristic yes song. It doesn't have cosmic themes or anything like that. It's just a sort of rock and roll romp with a bit of progressive attitude. I think it's great. Side B opens with Arriving UFO, which is another song that divides opinion. I personally think it's quite cool. The lyrics are, take it or leave it. But I think Steve Howe's guitar sounds, sort of subaquatic, psychedelic sounds, are really, really cool. And his playing is really cool. And it's a cool song. It's a different song. They're experimenting with some different grooves. There's this really staccato bass from Chris Squire, which I've never heard him do before. I like it. Then there's Circus, which, like Don't Kill the Whale, I just always skip. It's the most twee John Anderson, new age, hippy-dippy, almost childlike thing that I've ever heard, and it just does not belong on the record. I don't understand. Onward is a very slow, atmospheric ballad that at the time I didn't really appreciate it. It took me many years to appreciate it, and I think actually the thing that really changed my mind about that song was hearing Mark Kozelek from Red House Painters do a cover of it, and I realized, it's actually really a pretty song. The orchestration is a little bit on the sweet side for me, but it's good. It's a good song. Good songwriting. I guess it's a Chris Squire tune. The album ends with On the Silent Wings of Freedom, and this is where things really get interesting. It's a very sort of moody, cosmic, floaty opening, the verses are really quite magical. It's so good. Then the refrain kind of ruins the atmosphere a little bit. The refrain is more sort of happy-go-lucky up-tempo, and I don't quite understand how the refrain relates to the verses and the rest of the song, which is, funnily enough, the same issue I had with the non-album track of the Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe album, Vultures in the City, which also has really nice verses and a sort of corny refrain. But apart from that, Silent Wings, On the Silent Wings of Freedom is probably the best song on the album, and actually one of my favorite late 70s Yes songs. Great playing from everyone involved. Alan White is great. So yeah, those are the songs. Let's talk about Rick Wakeman's keyboards. So he used the Polymoog, polyphonic synthesizer that Moog specifically, correctly, were sort of pioneering the whole polysynth technology with that synth. But it's a little bit thin, very sort of facey sounding. And it's good for a lot of the things that Rick Wakeman does, like the sort of harpsichordy things. It sounds really good for that. But when it comes to, laying down really fat chords, it's not so great for that. Although it has to be said, Tony Banks used it to better effect on And Then There Were Three, where it does sound quite fat. Anyway, he should have waited for the Prophet 5. That would have sounded so much better. The other odd instrument that he uses on the album is the Byrotron, which is essentially a mellotron, where the difference is that whereas the mellotron gave you 8 seconds of sound before the sound cut out because you were playing, a tape roll that rolled its way through and then ended, the Byrotron looped it, which is, I don't even understand why they didn't do that from the beginning. But that was a smart thing to do. Suddenly you could sustain chords forever. But the problem was that it was very unreliable. It was badly built. It was actually, Rick Wakeman was involved in the making of the instrument, but it didn't turn out very well. And apparently on tour, he ended up throwing it in a ditch or something because he was so annoyed with it. So that was Rick Wakeman's contributions to the album. I still think that his playing on the album is great. Always miss Rick Wakeman when he's not in Yes. So I don't know, is Tormato a hidden gem? Is it a Prog turkey? Or is it something in between? I think it's not as bad as its reputation, but I think it's definitely the weakest album that Yes put out up to that point. I mean, they had a pretty amazing string of amazing albums, and this was the first album where you had songs that you could really pinpoint and say, this is actually not a really great song. The material was beginning to show some signs of fatigue, I guess you could say. And you can also sense that the band doesn't really gel all that well. There's a bit of disconnect between the musicians. I think the rhythm section is not as prominent as one would like it to be, a thing that got rectified on 1980s Drama, where Chris and Alan really come into their own and just rule the show. But it's not a bad album, and it's got some killer songs. It's got Future Times Rejoice, it's got Madrigal, it's got Release, it's got Arriving UFO, which I personally like, it's got Onward, and it's got On the Silent Wings of Freedom. So it's got a lot of good songs. I mean, it's relatively good bang for the bucks, all things considered. It's also a very typical late 70s prog album, Genesis sort of ended up in the same cul-de-sac. Renaissance, didn't they release an album in 1978? It was a little bit the same too. You could tell that every keyboardist was really enamored by the arrival of polysynths. That's all over those records. And all those records are sort of transitional. The bands are beginning to experiment with shorter songs and catchier refrains. But they hadn't quite taken the step into the 80s, obviously, because it wasn't the 80s. I mean, Yes would go into the 80s with a bang, with drama, Genesis with Duke. So it was a tricky transitional phase, I think, for all those bands. And as that goes, you know, it's a lot better than Love Beach, for instance. After Tormato, they still tried to keep things going, and that's, you know, a chapter for another Prog talk. They went to France to record with Roy Thomas Baker, legendary, infamous recording sessions with terrible material and a lot of internal strife. And of course, the end of the story was that Rick Wakeman and John Anderson left the band and the Buggles joined, and you got drama. But that's for another day. But all in all, I would say the final verdict is that Tormato is a 6.5 out of 10. That's my verdict. Decent. Okay, bye.